All right, Genesis 26, let's call this one reality. Why? Because from time to time here, we talk about the ways in which freedom, unchecked, can actually lead us into some harsh reality checks. And in looking at that a little more in depth today, let's go back to the example we used with drug dealing when we said that, look, cooking meth can get us the penalty of prison, but it can get us the consequence of blowing ourselves up if we're not careful. And today, if we look at it from the perspective of drug use as opposed to drug dealing or drug cooking, we can understand that, look, I can tell myself that I can use whatever substances I want. I got that freedom, but I can be blinded to the ways in which that freedom can actually lead me into the bondage of addiction. Likewise, with regard to friendships, I can tell myself, look, I can do whatever I want in my friendships without realizing the ways in which that freedom can lead me into the bondage of, ironically, isolation. Why? Because I can only be self-absorbed for so long before I actually begin to drive friends away. And then finally, with regard to money, I can say I got the freedom to do whatever I want with my money without realizing the ways in which that freedom can actually lead me into debt. And so those are just 3 examples of the ways in which freedom can actually lead us into bondage personally. But expand that out over a society and realize that the more individuals in a society begin to become preoccupied with their own freedom, the less stable an environment it can become for everyone to try to function in. And in many ways, that's exactly the situation that Isaac finds himself in Genesis 26, when he's now becoming successful. And as a successful, for lack of a better term, businessman, he is now trying to run a successful business in an untrustworthy environment as he is building wells in support of his business. He is finding that one well the people of the land have plugged because they're not happy about his success. Another one they've just taken. Why? Because it's easier to take than it is to work when you don't care about how it affects the person who actually dug the well. And then finally, beyond it being an unstable business environment, we've already talked about the ways in which it's an unstable environment for him to raise his family. Why? Because much like Abraham was uncomfortable telling them that Sarah was his wife, in the early parts of this chapter, Isaac is likewise going to be uncomfortable telling the folks that Rebecca is his wife, and he's going to repeat the lie that she is actually his sister. Why? Because of the instability of the environment in which he is trying to function. And so in a lot of ways, I think we can relate to that, because toward the end of Jesus's ministry, he points forward to times in which he's going to say that as lawlessness increases, the hearts of people are going to grow cold. Why? Because it's tough to trust in an environment where everybody is simply looking out for themselves. And so in a lot of ways, we're seeing Isaac's dilemma, but God is going to show him a way out in some counsel that he gives him earlier in the chapter, as God is extending the blessing that he gave to Abraham to Isaac in verse 4, where it reads, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. And 2 things to understand here are that God was going to give the land to Abraham, and Abraham was going to appreciate the value of obedience. And too often we look at obedience as the way that God keeps us away from things, as opposed to understanding the ways in which he uses it to actually spur us on to reach our potential, because that's exactly what he was doing with Abraham. Look at it this way. I can go into a gym and work on my jump shot all day, but I'm not going to reach my potential if I'm not working on it the right way. And I had a friend who told me this way. He said, Marcus, it's not practice that makes perfect. It's perfect practice that makes perfect. And in a lot of ways, if we started to look at God's rules and statutes as things that are guiding us on to efficiently reaching our potential, then we will avoid stigmatizing things that he's actually using to help us out. Understand this. We've talked about the ways in which grace, preached apart from accountability and truth, actually feeds the environment that created the kinds of scandals we've seen in churches recently. Now we're looking at the way in which grace, preached apart from obedience, can actually keep us from reaching our potential. And moreover, as we mentioned in the beginning, freedom unchecked can actually lead us into bondage. And so telling people that grace is this thing that they can appreciate and use to reach their potential apart from obedience is actually leading them back into the bondage of addiction, loneliness, and in many ways, debt, among other things. And so we probably do well to rediscover not only the ways that healthy boundaries help create stability, but ways in which they help reduce our regrets.